on to our featured speakers. Once again, to recap, they'll be speaking about their teaching experiences with a 2-semester honors course on drones in education and society. So first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sean Lawson. He's an associate professor in communication. He also has a degree in law. He and his wife have 2 dogs and have welcomed their first human child into their family in December. A little anecdote, Sean's first time flying a drone was eventful, much more like Charlie Brown flying a kite directly into a tree. That's documented here on the video camera that was attached to the drone and the neighbor who helped you climb up and get it out of the tree. Is that right? In the honors course, Sean specializes on the history of the development of drones, especially for the needs in the military and the legal aspects of their use. Dr. Avery Holton is an assistant professor in communication, and he hails from Texas, where he used to work for the Houston Astros. Is that right? Did I hear that right? So Avery is also an owner of a specialized sports car, which he had manufactured or detailed here in Utah, driven down to Texas, and immediately turned around and drove it back when he came to work here at the University of Utah. But the paint job got a little banged up, and so he brought it into the detail shop, where it was immediately stolen, used in a methamphetamine run.
This is a true story.
Lost, recovered, and replaced by the body shop, from what I hear. So he and his wife also have 2 dogs. So for those of you dog fans in the house, this is your group. In their honors course, Avery specializes in the innovative uses of drones in communication, media, and society. So please help me welcome Dr. Sean Lawson and Dr. Avery Holton.
Yeah, Sean will be bringing props and toys up while we chat. No, I'm going to talk first. I'm Avery Holton in the Department of Communication. This obviously is Sean Lawson. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on how we developed the course, specifically how Sean and I came up with the idea, how we thought about it a little bit beyond just building out the drones and what that meant to us, and how we tried to place the course more effectively in the realm of social applications for students. So first, what are drones? About 2 years ago, we probably started seeing, or you probably started seeing, drones pop up in the media. We had delivery drones, we have war-oriented drones, predator drones, we have teeny tiny drones that fit on the, not even in the palm of your hand, like on the tip of your finger. We have police applications for drones, drones that go off-road. This is actually a picture from somewhere in Utah. Mosquito outfitted drones you probably can't see, but there's a tiny little drone on that mosquito. Drones that are submersibles, can go underwater. Drones that are actually cars. This is a $40,000 prototype, so you could fly here if you wanted to and maybe land in this atrium. And drones that have bigger societal implications, such as this one, that is a life-saving device. Flies over and provides some medical equipment when it's needed. And then we have sort of the funky, weird ideas of drones. So pug drones. I chose this over the cat drone. Did anybody see the cat drone? Yes. Okay, so if you saw it, you can't unsee it. This is a legit thing where a guy took his dead cat, had it stuffed and mounted on a drone, and then scarred for life in the back. So Google it at your peril if you'd like to. But in looking at all of the information that was out there and floating around in the media hype, Sean and I one night, I think just over dinner, had a conversation about drones and what they meant and our perspectives, and how we had 2 kind of competing perspectives at the time. One that positioned drones and the conversation about drones as surveillance instruments, as wartime instruments, and another that positioned them more in this sort of hazy, emergent technology that could be used for communication and other pathways in society. And so during the conversation that went on for, I don't know, hours, like seemed like we talked about it forever, we thought maybe we could develop this into a course where we're not just talking about war or surveillance and the stigma that surrounds drones in that arena, but we're talking about societal implications with students. And in doing that, we figured out that we would also need to bring the technology to the students. So this couldn't just be a course where we talked about drones and then did nothing with them. So we kind of developed this idea of a drone gap, of where we saw academia heading with drones and what we could do to help address that gap. And that gap for us, let's see if I can, helped build our course. And the gap really was a lack of combining innovation, hands-on innovation and collaboration, with true critical thinking about drones. So at the time of our conversation, again, a couple years ago, there were a couple of institutes around the country that were already heavy into drones, especially military applications. Nevada, MIT, and even our own institute in the engineering sector was looking at ways to build out drones. But we didn't really see a lot of conversation going on about how they could be used in society, what the implications were, what the morals and ethical situations might be that students who can be either creating these or at least might have them in their lives would be dealing with. And so in developing the course, we first surveyed, and this is sort of a quick little glimpse, we surveyed everything that was going on out in academia. And this is a wiki page that one of our students created in the course that begins to show you some of the other institutes who are working with drones. So on this page, you'll see UPenn is up, Nevada's up, Nebraska's there, the University of Utah. Now, this doesn't mean everybody's talking about drones in the same way or even teaching them in the same way. And again, when we look at these, the one kind of big idea that keeps circulating in academia is we need to build drones. We need to come up with better applications for drones. We need to figure out ways to move them from surveillance instruments, sort of flying, I don't know, at 70,000 feet over land structures and taking pictures, to drones that can sniff out chemicals, drones that can help save lives, drones that can provide information beyond just the visual. And a lot of these institutes were doing that at the time, but again, they lacked courses that opened up critical analysis. It was all based on building. So in our approach, we put the students first. We decided that if students are going to be charged with building drones, if they're going to be charged with figuring out where they're positioned in their lives, if they're going to be charged with how to deal with them ethically, morally, and legally, then we should give them a voice first. And we wanted this to be an empowered course that we set up. And I should pause here to say that the course that we both created was a year-long course, co-taught by Dr. Lawson and myself in the Honors College, and it was supported with H2 Honors funding. So we had funding to put this course together, and we had sort of the creative liberties that sometimes we don't get in some of the structured courses. But Students First for us didn't just mean having the students doing some readings and coming in and giving lectures. What we did was we offered over the 3-hour period information of our own. Sometimes lectures that went 15 or 20 minutes, sometimes just lessons, but we always tried to get the students involved in critical thinking. We wanted them to tell us what we were missing. We wanted them to tell us how they would deal with certain issues, and we wanted it to be informed. So the courses were set up where they had history, they had legal background, they had regulatory information, which Dr. Lawson will talk about in a moment. They had sort of all the information they needed to think about drones and to do it in a collaborative fashion, to think on their own sometimes if they're doing readings outside of class, but to come in and sit in groups and talk about these things. So our first course in the fall of 2015, or 2014, not long ago, we had 10 students. And so they broke into really small groups. And in the spring, we had 20, 22, 24, 25 students. So this is a course that had a growth trajectory. And we had these students work together. And we had them innovate with one another. So just to give you an idea of some of the projects that students worked on before I get to kind of the cool techie side of building out the drones, we had them develop, with us kind of at the helm, a blog. And the blog, you can visit it now. It's dronesandsociety.com, or is it .org? .org. We built this out, and you can see in tiny print at the top, we had them post news about drones, we had them analyze drones, new regulations and laws, we had them profile companies, we had them talk to emergent scholars, emergent techies, people in the industry that could tell them where drones were heading. And this is all during the first semester. So creating this blog, which was channeled through our Twitter page, Drones in Society, which again, you could check out right now. I don't know if we've posted a lot to it lately.
Yeah, we haven't updated it in a while since the course ended.
Okay, so don't look at the Twitter feed right now, but it's there for the students to use. And then we encourage the students, and again, this is over the course of the 2 semesters, to really start tinkering, to become imaginative innovators. So we gave them this small drone. Every student it was the first semester, received one of these drones. This is extremely lightweight. I think it's about 6 ounces. It's nearly indestructible. I won't demonstrate, but it can crash into walls, crash into trees in some cases. It's got a mini-mounted camera, so you can actually follow the pathways that, when you're flying, you can have it come down and plug it into your computer and check out the imagery. But by giving that to students and allowing them to fly it around, we were able to talk about, yes, the coolness of the drone, the empowerment of actually using the technology, but also where they could and couldn't use the drones, right? So in 2014, when we started using these, the laws were a little murky, right? And the University of Utah is positioned kind of oddly geographically because we're close enough to the airport, and we also have a helipad here where we're not technically supposed to fly these things outside because we can mess with that airspace. So we had them fly these indoors, and then we found out that by flying them indoors, if you look above your heads, although I don't see any in here, so that's great, you'll often see sprinkler systems that still have the old-fashioned sprinkler head, and if you bump into those, even if you touch them, they all go off, right? And luckily that didn't happen. Somebody warned us before that happened. But we were able to talk to them about, when you're flying these things, when you're operating them, you have to think about your surroundings. You have to think about people and place and geography, the laws, what you're going to be doing with these. So we put them in their hands, and in the second semester, we charged them with the ultimate task. So again, 24, 25 students, most of whom were not engineering students, were taking this course. And this particular section, the spring semester, was positioned solely on building out a drone and sort of answering a CFP for drone innovation. So students were charged to come up with an idea for drones that wasn't out there yet, some way that drones could be used that moved beyond sort of the pug drone or the cat drone, and really position drones strongly in society to make them beneficial. So students, while they came up with these ideas, again in small groups, built out drones, and you'll see this kind of larger drone here, I won't pick it up, that is a kit. It's a drone kit. It's about $800 per kit. Again, we used the funding that we received through H2 to buy the kits. It's about a 3 to 4 pound drone, depending on what you put on it. It's got about an 8-minute battery life, but it's difficult to build. If you open up the kit, there are hundreds of parts, screws and bolts and nuts and wires and all sorts of things. But we wanted them to see how these worked, right? So they understand the critical thinking, they understand sort of where drones can be placed in society. Now they can see how they're built. They've flown them, they've tinkered with them, now they're actually going to build them. So we advance that level of empowerment even further. As they built them though, we had one group that finished, I think, on the first day. So in less than 3 hours built this drone. It took most of the other groups about 9 hours or so to build these and put these together. And I should say here again, Dr. Lawson and I didn't have much experience building drones, but Dr. Lawson had built out 2 before this, so had built 2 of these previously, and even with that experience, they're very difficult to put together. If you want to come up and see it at some point, there's so many intricate wires and functionalities. And so when students put these together, then we wanted them to be able to fly them. And what you're looking at here is an interactive space that we set up in the dark lab. So this is in engineering with Dr. Cam Liang, who is there, who has advanced drone technology tremendously, right? So he came over from, I think, Nevada or Reno, where he brought military grants with him, which is awesome. And he invited us into his space, and he has a safe flying space in the engineering building that's about a 40 by 40 netted in area where our students, who most of them had never flown drones this size, could go in and fly these things and see if they worked. The fun thing about this was the majority of them did not work, right? So they put them together, at least initially, they put them together and either they weren't set up right or configured right, and they would just flip over. So they would turn on, kind of go up and fall over. And for me, what was fun was we periscoped all of this, right? So we had this kind of going out on a live filter on Twitter and through Periscope. And at first, we only had a few followers, and then we started to get more, right? So every time we had it, we had a few dozen, and at one point, we had almost 100 followers kind of checking out what we were doing live and offering feedback on what we might be doing wrong, even though we had these great engineers. I think if we go back, this is one of the grad students front and center in the engineering school that helped us with the lab. They would kind of tell us what we should be doing and then asking students questions. You know, what are you doing with this? What do you plan on doing? And students got to talk about some of their ideas. So this is just one of the ideas that students came up with. We had 5 different ideas ranging from a water gun drone that started out as a water gun drone and turned into sort of an agricultural tool. We had one for cattle tracking, which now is actually a thing. Drones are used for that. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones, but this one was my favorite one. So this drone outfitted or prototyped with a device from MIT that actually can pick out mosquitoes from all other insects using a laser scanner, and it zaps the mosquito's wings, so the mosquito falls and dies. The students in this case, first it was cool and it could be fun and we're going to zap mosquitoes, came up with this really cool idea of developing a drone grid pad. So you would set drones in an area where there was some sort of mosquito infestation, where you want to stave off something like malaria, and drones would fly in grid patterns and recharge themselves. So you'd have multiple drones flying using this laser technology that I think could go out about 12 feet and just scanning for mosquitoes and killing them off. And the students came up with this idea, and as part of building out the prototype, they also had to build out the costs. Who would buy this? Who's going to use it? Can we put this on Kickstarter, GoFundMe, or is it something bigger? These are things they had to think about and talk to with us as they went through. And one of the other issues that they had to think about were the laws and regulations that might guide the drones now and also in the future. And this is where I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lawson to talk a little bit about what those look like.
All right. So, So just a quick correction on my bio. I actually do not have a law degree. So, as I say often in chats on the internet, I'm not a lawyer. However, I have spent a lot of time reading about the legal and regulatory issues related to drones. That's sort of been my main focus on drones. And my wife is a lawyer, and the three of us together have written a couple of pieces together. One is a law review article about the First Amendment implications of the FAA's ban on commercial use of drones, and the FAA has lumped journalistic uses in with that and has basically said, well, journalists get paid, therefore it's commercial, therefore we can ban it. And we've written a piece for the Boston College of Law's Journal on Science and Technology Law, which takes on that issue, and basically our take on that is that's absolutely illegal and a violation. It's a prior restraint and it's absolutely clearly illegal. Nobody's challenged it yet, though. So, and then we have another piece that we wrote together for a journalism publication that looks at sort of some of the opportunities and challenges for drones in journalism. And so these concerns about regulation are part of why I got interested in this. And unfortunately, in today's discussion, and often in discussions that Avery and I have, presentations we give about drones, I end up being sort of the mom in A Christmas Story, right? That's warning everyone you're going to shoot your eye out. So I'm excited about drones. I think they're awesome, but I'm also the one that's sort of like, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble in various different ways with drones. And so that's sort of part of why I got interested in this to begin with. So, like I explained to Greg when we were talking about, my sort of background with this, and he was talking about introducing me. My background is actually in studying the military, military theory and strategy, new technologies, surveillance, the use of chaos theory in the military to theorize information age warfare. And then suddenly I got interested in domestic drones and regulatory and legal issues. And part of the reason for that is I got one of these guys in a different color, but one of these exact drones a few years ago for Christmas. My wife bought it for me, and as Greg said, I promptly took it out and got it like caught in a tree and landed it on a neighbor's roof. And lesson number one was these are not nearly as easy to fly as they look when you watch like YouTube videos or news videos or whatever where you see these things. And so as I started like doing more research on these things online, I started seeing all of these instances where the FAA was going after people for using these things, right? And they're calling them drones, they're calling them unmanned aerial vehicles, unmanned aerial systems. They're using the same terminology that's used in the military, right? And I'm like, well, this is not a predator. I mean, this is a toy. This isn't a predator drone. Like lumping them all in the same category is problematic. So that sort of took me down the rabbit hole of domestic legal and regulatory issues related to quadcopter toy drones. But I think it relates because, one issue is, how we frame these things, right? And so this is one thing that we really talked about in our class, and how the sort of rhetorical framing of the technology in part helps us to understand why we're in the regulatory and legal situation that we're in. So basically, the goal of what I want to talk about briefly is just to sort of provide a quick overview of these sort of legal and regulatory challenges to drones in higher education. And I guess the too long didn't read version of this is that the current state of things is really still a confusing mess. There's been a little bit of progress with the drone registration process that you may have heard about, and we'll talk a little bit more about here in a second. But that really doesn't fix the issues that we have in higher education for using this technology in the classroom and for research. However, there is some hope that if and when the actual proposed official drone regulations from the FAA ever get approved and actually fully come online, there is some space within those regulations that might open up an easier space for us to use this technology. So basically what I'm going to do is I'll sort of talk about where we've been and the initial sort of regulatory and legal challenges that we faced and what we did to try to work around those. Second, where we're at now and how it doesn't really solve our problem, and then where we might be going in the future. So issues related to the FAA drone regulations, in particular hobbyist use of what have commonly, really in the past, just been called radio-controlled model aircraft have been in the news a lot in the last couple of years. You've probably seen some of these stories. And really sort of are part of, like I said, what piqued my interest in this technology in the first place. And like I said, part of what we've seen is a sort of redefinition, a reframing of radio-controlled model aircraft, which have been around for decades, have really not been regulated much at all. There's a series of sort of voluntary rules that hobbyists that fly these things have been working under since 1981, but they haven't been subject to official legal regulation by the FAA. But suddenly what we have in about 2007 and after is sort of a redefinition of this class of hobbyist technology that's been around for a really long time, much longer than 1981, in fact, being redefined, right, in the context of public concern over drones, which really comes out of the context of the military use of the technology. Okay, so in 2007, the FAA puts out a policy document which says commercial use of drones, by which they mean radio-controlled model aircraft, is now illegal, and then they sort of try to put fear into everyone by going after this guy named Raphael Perker. His legal battle with the FAA is a long story. He ultimately ended up settling his case. But this is one of the central issues that sort of brought a lot of attention to the regulatory and legal aspects to domestic drones, and again, part of what's piqued my interest in this stuff. Okay, so like I said, one of the key issues has been the purpose for which the drone is used, right? Is it hobby use, recreational, commercial use, or public use by a public institution? And so at first we thought, okay, well, I mean, we're not commercial, obviously, right? We're nonprofit. We're at a state university, so we don't have to worry about that. We'll just make sure we operate under the voluntary safety guidelines that have been in place since 1981 for recreational and hobby users. We'll be fine. But then when I started looking into these issues more, I realized that's not going to work because the FAA has some really creative definitions of hobby, recreational, commercial. Like in any kind of legal context, in law, the definitions of things are often very different than what your common understanding of those terms would be. So it became pretty clear pretty quickly we weren't going to be able to do that, right? So we said, okay, well, we're public, right? So we'll operate as a public aircraft. Except that to fly a drone as a public aircraft, as any kind of state institution, whether it's a university or police, you have to get what's called a certificate of authorization or waiver, or just what's in short called a COA. This can take a long time. It can be very expensive. In fact, you either have to have a pilot's license to fly manned airplanes, or you have to go and get one, which is a lengthy and expensive process. And we're like, well, that's not going to happen by the time we have to teach this class. And we really don't think we need a pilot's license to fly this toy. Okay, that's ridiculous. So the question was, what can we do to get around this? And really the only answer for us was, well, we're just going to have to fly inside. So it is clear that the FAA has no legal authority to regulate us flying these things inside of a building. So we're like, okay, that's what we're going to do. In which case, we got to start off with something that's pretty small, pretty light. If it crashes into something, it's not going to break anything. One, because I had already learned the hard way, these things are actually pretty hard to fly. So, you don't want to hand them to students and then say, go fly this, and then they're all broken immediately. Thank you, Dean, for the money. We just blew it all. In literally less than 5 minutes, we just flushed it all down the toilet because every student broke their drone. And we don't want to be breaking things inside the university, right, if these things crash. So that's what we had to do. And like Avery said, in the fall, each student got one of these to keep. Another way we sort of tried to work around the regulatory and legal issues is that we gave them to the students. The students owned them. They were theirs. They were not required to bring them to class or use them in class to be in the class or to get a grade for the class. So nobody could say, like, oh, these are university property, or the students are being forced to use these, therefore, all sorts of legal and regulatory problems. Like, no, this is a gift. You get this as a gift for taking the class. And then we actually had them sign a waiver. We gave them the safety rules, the 1981 safety rules, right? Made them read them and understand them, and then we added some more rules to that, like don't harass people or animals with your drone, right? Don't fly them near an airport. Don't fly them on campus anywhere near the helipad at the hospital, and sort of explained all the problems, If you live in the dorms, do not fly them inside without our supervision or in this designated space that the dean has given us in the Honors College, because if you hit one of these things on the ceiling, the whole building will flood, et cetera, right? And we had them sign those and understand, the issues behind that. So here's a picture in the Great Ideas, or Big Ideas, whatever that room is called, in the Honors College. Another picture of one of our students flying this small drone. And you can see does this have a laser on it? Yeah, so you can see in the top corner here, here's what you don't want to hit, okay, with a drone. Otherwise, you'll flood the whole building. So, there was always at least one of us, probably both of us, like shaking nervously every time a student was flying one, keeping an eye out to make sure they weren't getting close to these. The general rule was this line in the room. If you got the drone up to that line, and then you needed to come back down, don't go higher than that. Even if that means like, I'm scared, I don't know what to do, just cut the throttle entirely and let it crash to the floor. It's not going to break. I mean, seriously, I've crashed this thing into the concrete in front of my house from like 50 feet up, full speed. It's fine, okay? Trees, roofs, like Greg said. So, on carpet in a room, 10 feet, it's fine. The second thing we did, as Avery noted, is we flew inside. The larger ones that the students built, we also flew those inside, but these are much too big to fly in the classroom setting that we had. So luckily, we were able to partner with the Dark Lab in mechanical engineering, and one of their grad students helped us program the computer on these things and fly them inside. But even with all of that, there's a lot of limitations, right? I mean, these things are difficult to fly. You really need a lot of space. They're difficult to learn to fly them in a confined interior space. Okay, so the students were really limited in what they were able to do, especially when we got to these bigger ones. So you'll notice, for example, this has this antenna-looking thing. It's actually a GPS antenna, and the computer board that's housed in here actually has an autopilot on it. So you can actually use a computer interface, program waypoints, have it use GPS, and go out and fly a pattern autonomously on its own and come back. Okay, it's really cool stuff. We couldn't use it at all. right? There's no way to use it at all inside. You can't get a GPS signal, and it's just not big enough. Basically, the students could sort of take them up, they could hover them around, maybe fly them a little bit in each direction. And it's not even big enough to do like a banking turn, right? They could sort of go up and fly left, fly right, forward, back, up and down, but they couldn't even do like an actual turn or like a figure eight or something like this. There's just not enough room. So pretty limited. Okay, so where are we at now? The FAA has been offering exemptions for commercial use on a case-by-case basis, but that doesn't really help us out, right? Because remember, we're not commercial. We fall in sort of a weird space, right? Where we're not commercial, but we're also not hobbyist. So that doesn't, the exemption process for commercial use doesn't really help us out. There's recently been the implementation of a drone registration program. How many people have heard of that? Have you heard about drone registry? Yeah. So I registered. Did you go and register at all? So see, now you got to pay like $5 or whatever. I made sure I did mine because I'm cheap. Before the deadline, we can still do it for free, but I think it costs $5 now, so it's not bad. So if you're a hobby or recreational user now of a drone that weighs more than, I think it's a half a pound, then you have to go and register, and you get a little number that you can put on there. But again, that is problematic for us. Doesn't really help us out for a couple of reasons. Number one, this process might not even stick around. It's the subject of 2 different lawsuits right now claiming that the whole process is illegal. I'm actually pretty sympathetic to that argument when you read the laws they're using to put the registry process in place. I'm not sure it's actually really legal for the FAA to do it. But even if it is legal, it still doesn't really help us because we're not technically hobby or recreational. And so part of what you have to do when you go through this process is agree to a number of terms, right? You know, everything in life has an end user license agreement now, and the FAA drone registry does too. And it basically, one thing you have to stipulate to is that you will only use your drone for hobby and recreational purposes. Well, again, we're not commercial, but we're also not hobby and recreational. And I suspect that the FAA would say that, you know, professors using drones in university courses doesn't count, right? So I've registered my own personal drones for this, but, you know, well, technically this is too light to have to be registered. This one I think would have to be registered, although I haven't weighed it, but I'm pretty sure it would have to be registered. But in any case, probably doesn't fall under this anyway, okay? So really, still the only avenue to fly outdoors is still that COA process, which takes a long time. And even if you get the COA, there's a lot of limitations on what you can do. In fact, a lot of times if you go through the really long, expensive process of getting the COA, the restrictions that they put on you in terms of where you can fly your drone and how you can fly it are more restrictive than what an average hobbyist would be allowed to do. So we actually know some folks, I won't mention any names here, but we actually know some folks, some researchers that we've talked to that went through the process of getting the COA, and they kind of wish they hadn't, because to get the COA, they had to agree to all of these rules that basically almost ground them and make it impossible for them to fly. Whereas if they would have sort of surreptitiously just said, we're hobbyists out flying, and denied that they were doing any of it for research purposes, they would have been a lot more free to fly in more places and do more things. So we're still sort of in the same spot as where we were before, even with this registry process and even with the exemptions for commercial use. We still really haven't made a lot of progress in terms of clearing up these situations for academic higher education uses. But where might we be going? Things could potentially be getting better. So last year, the FAA finally released its proposed rule for unmanned aircraft systems. Public comment on those ended last April. I've seen news stories saying they could be out sometime by July of this year, but we'll see. The FAA is already years behind schedule, so who knows? There's hope that these rules might sort of open more of a space for us to fly. So in terms of who can fly, it would be less strict than the current COA requirement. So the FAA said in their press release about this, quote, under the proposed rule, the person actually flying a small UAS would be an operator, and an operator would have to be at least 17 years old, pass an aeronautical knowledge test, and obtain an FAA UAS operator certificate. So what that means, that's good news, is no more having to go out and get an actual pilot's license for a manned aircraft to fly a small quadcopter. So that would be a huge improvement for us. Now, the question is, how quick is the process of getting that operator license? Would only the instructor of the class need to get the license, or would every single student that wants to touch a drone have to get the license? How quickly would that process happen? I mean, if it could be done in the space of a semester, it could actually be a great learning opportunity for the students. Teach the curriculum of the aeronautical knowledge test that the FAA gives, have them take the test, have them get their operator's license, right, as part of the curriculum of the class. But all of that assumes that the bureaucratic process of doing that can be done in the course of a semester, and we don't know yet how that will actually work. The second thing that is a potential opening for us to make things a little bit easier is that the proposed rule holds out the possibility that there can be a separate, even less stringent set of rules created for what the proposed rule calls micro UAS. So these are drones that are less than 4.4 pounds. And so this would definitely include this. I think it might even include this, although I don't know, this is pretty heavy. But it would definitely include something like a Phantom drone. I don't know if anybody's seen the sort of red and white ones, the one with the pug on it, right? Minus the pug, that drone comes in at less than 4.4 pounds. And so there could be even less stringent rules for drones of those size or smaller. There's even legislation that I think a representative from Oregon has proposed just in the last couple months to speed up this micro UAS possibility and actually just have Congress do it. Just pass a law that says if you're less than 4.4 pounds, you operate essentially under the 1981 safety rules for model aircraft, and then done, okay, and just make that a law. So basically, things are still a little murky, but there is the opportunity for improvement and some more space for us in the future. Okay, so do you have more? You had more stuff, right? No, you don't. Oh, okay. Yeah, see, this is why it would have been good for me to look at the full presentation. So that's sort of where we're at in terms of the regulatory issues and where we're at in terms of innovation. So like Avery noted on a previous slide, the course will be offered again this coming fall. It's sort of been consolidated down into just one semester. So the first time we offered it, we had the H2, the Humanities Honors Fellowship, which was jointly funded by the College of Humanities and Honors College. And it was to do 2 courses. And so we did that fall 2014, spring 2015. It went so well, and the dean loved it so much, Dean Torty loved it so much that she's like, we got to keep doing this. But we can't do like 2 courses every year. Let's take the best aspects of both of the courses, combine them into one course. And so we'll be doing that next fall, which Avery had the slide up there for. So if you have students that you work with who might be interested in this, please send them our way. And then beyond that, we're working on trying to have the course taught at, once a year or once every other year and make it a regular part of the curriculum. But we're trying to work out how we just bureaucratically and institutionally make that happen between the communication department and honors college, and who pays and for buyouts and all that kind of stuff, and course scheduling, and is it cross-listed, and how do we work that, and SCH and all that kind of stuff. But we're working on trying to keep this thing going. Any other thing that you want to add, Avery, before we stop about the future of all of this in terms of what we're doing and what other people are doing?
Just if anybody has any questions, we're here.
Yeah, I think we have like maybe 10 minutes for some questions or something. So.
The microphone for questions because it's being recorded.
Okay. You want to come back up here? We can share the limelight. I was going to say the microphone.
Talk like this.
Right.
All right, are there any questions?
We're the drone guys.
This just got incredibly romantic.
Drones are romantic.
I like where these drones are going.
Romancing the drone.
Senator Michael Douglas movie.
Little drone humor.
Hi, I'm Kun, PhD student at city planning. I'm thinking of using drone in my own research. So this is about the research purpose. Just first question is, should I register my own drone as a kind of hobbyist category for using that drone? And the other one maybe is not. I don't know if it's appropriate, but do you think if I use drone to observe people's movement in public space, like a park or plaza, do you think I need the IRB approval? Because it's a human subject.
Those are great questions. Yeah, so on the first case, I'm gonna say, honestly, I don't know. I mean, that's a really murky area. I would say, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give you official legal advice. And even if I were a lawyer, I probably still wouldn't give you legal advice because you're not actually my client. But just as a guy, you know, who's read a lot about this, I would say it probably can't hurt you to register. So that's the first thing. At least if you registered and you did get into some kind of problems, you could at least say, I tried, I thought I was, right? I thought I was covering myself, which might give you a little bit of cover. But I think what you're talking about as a PhD student doing research at a university, that's a really murky area that is just really not addressed by any of the current regulations. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, that's a great question about IRB. So like if you're a hobbyist or you're a photographer or something, and you're out flying your drone in a park in a clearly public space, okay, and you're not otherwise violating any rules of that space, and you're just like taking pictures. Now I know a lot of people are gonna be creeped out, like, oh my God, there might be a drone flying above us at Sugar House Park, taking pictures. That's a privacy violation. I wanna get my shotgun out and shoot it down or whatever. It's not a privacy violation. It's not. You have no expectation of privacy in a public park. Just like I can pull out my iPhone and take a picture of you, I could strap my iPhone to this drone and fly it up 20 feet and take a picture of you. There's no difference. The fact that it's on a drone makes no difference legally, okay, for the person on the ground. Now, in your case, it's different though, right? Because you're doing it as part of research. And so there might not be like a legal privacy issue implicated, but as you know, there could be an IRB issue. I would say in that case, you probably do want to get IRB approval for that. I mean, you've done more human subjects work than I have, so you can weigh on this too. But I would say yes, you want to get IRB, just because I would feel like if you were at Sugar House Park going around taking pictures of people with your iPhone for research purposes, I think you'd need IRB for that. So putting it on a drone is probably no different. I don't know, what would you say?
I think we should at least advise you to talk with IRB, right? So coming from another institution in the South here, we actually have a pretty good IRB system. So even just calling them or emailing them and walking through what you're doing, in this case, I would suggest talking with them personally so there's nothing lost in translation, because a lot of times they hear drone or they hear aerial and suddenly these kind of fireworks go off. Instead, just walk over there and talk to them. One similar study that was done without drones but taking pictures in public settings to capture reactions, I think it was during a sporting race, was exempt from IRB, but at least it was on file as applying through IRB. Right?
On the news this morning, I just caught part of a story that they were talking about making it legal for emergency services, fire services, or rescue services to shoot down drones that were interfering when they were trying to respond to services, but I hadn't heard anything else about that. Do you know, is this a law that has been passed, is going to pass, and what is involved in the law?
This is a local law in Utah?
I couldn't catch if it was national or Utah. I think it was local Utah.
Local, yeah, so, all right, well, there's, yeah. I won't go there, but.
Why the fire station, the fire guy hasn't gone.
Right, I mean, why does the firehouse have an arsenal of anti-aircraft weapons? That's the first question. I would say, A, that's a bad idea. I mean, I understand their concerns, but adding shooting weapons into the air and trying to shoot down small flying things to the equation of an otherwise emergency situation doesn't help the situation, right? Just from a practical standpoint. Number two is that law would likely be illegal, even if Utah or some other state passed it, that would likely be illegal at the federal level because of the issue of preemption, right? So states cannot pass laws that preempt federal laws. And so while it might seem insane right now that the FAA defines this thing as an aircraft just the same as a 747 or any other aircraft and claims that this is subject to all federal aircraft regulations. So like, for example, you have to place the flight manual in I don't know how you place a flight manual. Like, this is part of what's ridiculous about what the FAA is trying to do, is that there's lots of regulations that they claim apply to this that physically is just not even possible for it to apply. But nonetheless, the FAA claims right now, this is an aircraft, both these are aircraft, right? And they're subject to all those rules. Well, guess what? It's against the law in the United States to shoot down aircraft. Wonder of wonders, right? So for a state to then come along and pass a law that says it's legal to shoot down an aircraft would be illegal in and of itself, because it would preempt federal law on that issue, and also probably not a smart thing to do.
So are there TSA body scans to fly the aircraft?
No, there's not, but yeah. Well, and TSA is a different thing than FAA, so yeah. It's under Homeland Security, I think, right? Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Just a quick question. I'm just curious what the majors were of students that were represented in that class, because I think you mentioned they weren't mostly engineering students. So.
Yeah, I think it varied from the first semester to the second semester. So I think we did have more engineering in the second semester than, did we only have 4?
I thought there were 4 or 5. Our top student, or I should say our top student, our student who seemed most savvy with the drones was not an engineering student, but he was building parts for drones to make drone technology improve. Like one part for a camera mount that stabilized cameras, and he was selling these on Kickstarter and GoFundMe, and actually making money while we were doing this. So he was in that group where they built the drone in like an hour versus the 9 hours that it took everyone else.
Right, and the group that sort of gave us a little bit of a heart attack, because we give them the kits, right? And like Avery said, these look pretty simple once they're together, but when you get the kit, there's a million pieces, right? And you're sort of amazed, like, how is there so many pieces for such a simple looking thing, right? And these students in this particular group, and we just gave them this lecture about now, lay everything out in an orderly way and follow the instructions, and there's lots of little pieces, don't lose them, there's no replacements, be careful, blah, 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 Again, you'll shoot your eye out, that's me, right? These guys open the box, literally just dump everything on the table, pieces are going everywhere. They're like looking at the instructions, and the instructions are like upside down. They're like, yeah, we got it, don't worry about it. They're done in an hour, and we're like, oh my God. But yeah, that guy had been flying radio-controlled model aircraft for quite a while. He was a film student, and his Kickstarter project actually got funded during the course of our class, right? So he was pretty excited about that. Yeah, we had a range of students. We had a Middle East Studies major, we had an English major, we had history majors. We did have quite a few engineering, mechanical, biomedical. We had computer science students. Huh?
One government.
Yeah, somebody who's in like poli-sci, government, something like that. So it was quite a range of students that took the class. We really want to up the diversity of majors that are in the class the next time around in the fall. And I'll also say we really want to try to up the gender diversity. So none of the pictures, I realize all the pictures that we put up were all male students. We did have a handful of female students in the 2 classes combined, but not nearly as many as we really would like to have. So again, if you have students that you work with that might be interested in this, please help us get the word out so that we try to get a better mix of majors and diversity in the class going forward. But it was another thing that we did in the spring semester in the innovation class, where we put them in groups. Students built 5 of these, so there were 5 groups. We had 25 students. There were 5 students in each group. And part of what we tried to do when we assigned the groups, we didn't let them pick the groups, we assigned the groups. And part of what we tried to do in making the groups was sort of come up with a diversity of majors and as much gender diversity as we could get in each of the groups. So I think we did have 5 female students so that each group had at least 1 female student. And then we tried to make sure that we didn't have any one group that was totally dominated by engineers, that we had non-engineers spread out through all of the groups. And so that we got that sort of diversity the main issue being we really wanted a diversity of thinking and approaches to thinking about the technology and the innovation and what could be done with it and coming up with creative ideas. And so a lot of times what we found is the engineering students were great, but a lot of times their innovative ideas would be about the technology itself, right? So how do we make this thing itself work better from like an efficiency standpoint or sort of technical standpoint, as opposed to maybe larger societal applications in some way. So,
Well, let's give Sean and Avery a round of applause.